Hello everyone. I've had quite a few people asking me what the difference is between watercolor and gouache, so I thought it was about time that I made a little video. Watercolor and gouache, both quinacridone rose and cerulean blue, both from the same maker, M. Graham, and both artist quality. So I do have these little swatch cards made up. This is the gouache, this is the watercolor. They're both single pigment paints made with PV19. The watercolor version is transparent. The gouache version is semi-transparent. And cerulean blue, watercolor gouache, they are both single pigment paints as well, PB36. Both light fast 1. The watercolor is semi-opaque. The gouache is opaque. So this is M. Graham's chart on their watercolors, and as you can see, watercolors come anywhere from transparent to opaque, and then they are often classified as staining or granulating. This is their chart on their gouache, and as you can see, they also come in transparent to opaque. If you're interested in making your own watercolors, here is a fantastic brand. They offer pigments. The thing with these is they are non-toxic and professional grade. So on the reverse, so they give you the little pigment pouch, but they also give you recipes on how to make oil paint, egg tempera, but also watercolor and gouache. Repeat the steps for the natural watercolor and then mix in 1 teaspoon of limestone powder for 6 teaspoons of pigment. So that is really the only difference between watercolor and gouache, is that gouache has limestone added to it, which is calcium carbonate. One of the main differences between watercolor and gouache is in how you paint with them. Here I'm painting this simple shape of a red ball with watercolor, just using wet and wet technique. I'm going to paint the same thing with the gouache as if it were watercolor, and then also the more traditional way. The one at the top, I'm using the white of the paper to shine through for the whites. The one at the bottom, I'm using white gouache. Gouache tends to paint more like acrylic or oil mediums. And also with gouache, the darker paints tend to dry lighter, lighter paints tend to dry darker. With watercolor, overall, they tend to dry about 2 shades lighter. For me, gouache tends to be a little bit more complicated to paint with because every brush stroke is visible, it seems. I'm a professional watercolorist, but I'm very much still learning how to paint with gouache. With watercolor, and these are the two we painted with gouache. This one I painted using just water, and this one I used in the more traditional manner with white gouache. So another difference between watercolor and gouache is that with watercolor, because it is a more transparent medium as a whole, it has increased luminosity. So these are all M. Graham watercolor paints. The large stripe is the gouache version, and the thin stripe here is the watercolor version. So you can see, even though it's the same color, the same pigment, these paints, the watercolor does seem to be more transparent, especially going over the black stripe, and it does have increased luminosity compared to the gouache counterpart. With gouache, you can paint lights over darks. You can't really achieve that with watercolor. You want to paint lights and build up darker, which is my understanding is opposite from painting with acrylic or oil paints. But if you can tell, there's this matte quality to gouache paintings. You can seal these and frame them behind, or without having to frame them behind glass, and these are all ones that I'm kind of still working on. This one is a watercolor that I started on clay board, and you can see like the luminosity in the petals and the stem there, how I'm letting the white background shine through. I put a swatch of the cerulean blue and then I went over it and over it and over it trying to mix. There was minimal reactivation. Here it is with a very dilute glaze of the cerulean blue, and here's a dark glaze, and you can still see the outline of the Quin rose underneath. On this side, I did the same thing where I went over it multiple times, and the red or the rose colored pigment underneath really started to become reactivated and mix into that swatch. Here I've got I didn't do a light one. I guess I did two darker ones, but you can kind of see there how there's decreased luminosity compared to this watercolor Quin rose compared to the gouache Quin rose. And oh, I can get them both in the same frame there, and you can see how this one is more luminous and bright than this one, even though they're the same pigment. Oh, and another thing I wanted to talk about is metallic watercolors. These are all from Ember Lily Creations. Aren't they just gorgeous? Fuji is one of my favorites. But as you can see on this black line, they all tend to sit on the surface of the painting. So here's an example of me using metallics. Most of the time what I recommend is getting yourself a set of normal watercolor paints and then using metallics as little accents on top. If you're trying to paint with just metallic watercolors, you're kind of missing out on being able to get all the nuances like these blooms and things with watercolor. I hope that this little explanation was helpful, and if you have questions, put them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. If you like this, I'd really appreciate it if you went over to YouTube and hit that follow. See you next time, guys, and happy painting.